it over to you.
Thanks very much. It's as usual. It's wonderful to be with you in the Zoom room of the Santa Monica KTC, and it's great to see my friends and talk to you about some Dharma. And if you have any questions, what you can do is you can type into chat your questions if you think of a question while I'm talking. Hey, I've got a quick question for our host. Would it be possible to make me a co-host so that I can do screen sharing? Because that might be a fun thing to do here, so that I can show you a few things.
I think you are co-host already. Can you try it?
Fantastic. Oh, that's great. I got to be honest with you. I didn't look.
Oh, good.
You know, so that's fantastic. Okay. Okay. So I'd like to thank you for the invitation to come and talk to your group. And I thought about the different things that are being presented and so forth. And I thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about what lineage is and what lineage means, and to talk specifically about the Karma Kagyu lineage. And so to do that, I'm going to use a couple of resources. And one of the resources I'm going to use is the website kagyuoffice.org. At kagyuoffice.org is a really a very nice website that talks about the history of Buddhism in general and the Kagyu lineage in particular. And so I'm going to be putting a little bit of information on screen for you. And let me see if I can get that arranged. Being able to do two things at once is a very difficult skill, but I'm going to give it my best. All right. So I'd like to begin by reciting a prayer, and if you can recite it along with me. This is a prayer that I'm going to be talking about next time we chat together. And let's see, here we go. You'll recognize this prayer. It is the Karma Kagyu lineage prayer that we use at the beginning of the Chenrezig sadhana. And so in that way, it's a prayer with which you're already familiar. And so I'm going to recite it in English as a start for our talk tonight. And you can kind of join in heart and mind. And since everybody has got their mute buttons on, we won't be talking over each other, but I'm going to offer this prayer as a beginning for us to talk about the Mahamudra lineage. Great Vajradhara, Tilopa, Naropa, Marpa, Milarepa, Lord of Dharma Gampopa, knower of the 3 times, omniscient Karmapa, holders of the 4 great and 8 lesser lineages, Drigung, Taglung, Zalpa, these 3, glorious Drukpa, and so on, masters of the profound path of Mahamudra, unequaled protectors of beings, the Dogpo Kagyu. I supplicate you, Kagyu Lamas, grant your blessing that following your example, I hold your lineage. Detachment is the foot of meditation, as is taught. To this meditator who is not attached to food and wealth, who cuts the ties to this life, grant your blessings that I have no attachment to honor or gain. Devotion is the head of meditation, as is taught. The Guru opens the gate to the treasury of oral instructions. To this meditator who continually supplicates you, grant your blessings that uncontrived devotion is born within. Non-distraction is the body of meditation, as is taught. Whatever arises is fresh, the nature of thought. To the meditator who rests simply without altering it, grant your blessing that meditation is free from conception. The nature of thought is Dharmakaya, as is taught. Nothing whatsoever, it arises as everything. To this meditator for whom all arises as unceasing play, grant your blessings that I realize samsara and nirvana inseparable. Through all my births, may I not be separated from the perfect Guru, and so enjoy the splendor of Dharma. Perfecting the qualities of the paths and stages, may I quickly attain the state of Vajradhara. Okay, thank you. And I'll say a short prayer in English now, a prayer of taking refuge. In the Buddha, his teaching, and the order most excellent, we take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may we attain Buddhahood for the sake of all that lives. In the Buddha, his teaching, and the order most excellent, we take refuge until enlightenment is reached. Through the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may we attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, his teaching, and the order most excellent, we take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may we attain Buddhahood for the sake of all that lives. And I'll recite one prayer to the gurus of the lineage, and then we'll begin. O Paldens Hawe Lama Rinpoche, Dagi Chiwar Pede Denshula, Kadran Jembo Gune Je Sunte, Ku Sum Toking Udrup Saldu So. So the topic this evening is lineage. And a part of the reason I wanted to speak about this was because our center, the center in Santa Monica, as well as the center in Columbus, we all represent a specific lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. And so I thought it would be of interest and important for us to understand what lineage is and what it means. And so I'm going to start with some of the simple pieces of it. Now, you might think when you come to the Dharma Center and you learn your quiet sitting meditation, the shamatha meditation, it seems very simple and very direct, and yet very applicable to your everyday life. And we hear it said that these practices, that simple shamatha meditation that we learn, goes back 2,500 years to the historical Buddha Shakyamuni, who lived in India, attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, and then began teaching for the benefit of all beings. And after his passing away, the teachings of the Buddha were first passed down in an oral tradition from master to disciple, and in an unbroken line. Those teachings were passed down for several generations before they were committed to writing. And then finally, when the writing was done, we had what are called the sutras, the Vinaya, and the Abhidharma, the three baskets, the famous three baskets of Buddhist scripture. And these teachings continue to be handed down from one spiritual generation to the next. And eventually, Buddhist missionaries spread out across Asia, teaching the teachings of the Buddha in all kinds of places, in Southeast Asia and in Northern Asia, and far to the east. And so it happened that the teachings of the Buddha broke into little lineages of teaching. In other words, the Buddha gained enlightenment, taught his disciples, they gained enlightenment, they taught their disciples, they gained enlightenment, they taught their disciples, and so on. And there were special, what we call special lineages of the Buddhist teaching that passed down to the various countries of Asia. In Tibet, the teachings of Buddhism were spread in the country of Tibet, not just once, but twice. There were the old tradition, there was the old or Nyingma tradition of Tibetan Buddhism that was spread in the 8th century by the great master Padmasambhava or Guru Rinpoche. And then there were in the 10th and 11th centuries what we call the Sarma, or the new lineages of Tibetan Buddhism, beginning with Atisha and all of those great masters who were invited to come to Tibet to teach Buddhism then in a second spreading of the Dharma. And so in Tibet itself, there were two distinct lineages. The various Nyingma lineage or old lineage and the Sarma lineages. And so the Nyingma ended up with one tradition, the Sarma divided into many. And the three that we know today are the Kagyu, the Sakya, and the Gelug. And so those are the, altogether, they make four of the existing lineages of Tibetan Buddhism. And so I'm going to be zeroing in just a little bit on the Karma Kagyu tradition of Tibetan Buddhism so that we can learn a little bit about the name of our center, Karma Thegsum Chöling. Karma refers to the Karma Kagyu lineage and the head of our tradition known as the Karmapa. And Thegsum means three vehicles, which refers to the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma that happened in the Buddha's lifetime, the three developments of his teaching and how his teaching grew and developed, and how he presented the truth of suffering, its causes, its solution, and the path. And so that's the meaning of Thegsum. Chöling means Dharma place. It's a place where the Buddhist teaching can be taught and practiced. And so those of us who belong to Karma Thegsum Chöling, we're part of one particular lineage. And it's really great to learn about the lineage and to get a little bit of a flavor of its history, but also to see what the practices of that lineage are and how we can practice those in our everyday life. To begin with, as I mentioned, everybody learns shamatha practice. That's how we begin our Buddhist teaching and our Buddhist practice with quiet sitting meditation. It allows us to calm the mind and allows us to become aware of our thought processes. Those of you who remember the teachings of the Four Noble Truths know that the Buddha said suffering was part of life. It had a cause, it has a solution, and there's a path that leads to the end of suffering. Suffering is something with which we are all familiar. We've all had physical suffering, emotional suffering, mental suffering, spiritual suffering. We've had all kinds of suffering. And the Buddha taught that the suffering is not coming at us from the outside, even though circumstances may make us think that suffering actually comes from within the individual by our clinging and fixation. Clinging and fixation are particularly to the self is really the cause of our suffering and difficulty. So clinging and fixation then is the cause of suffering. And then that leads us to an understanding that since suffering has a cause, it also has a solution, which means that we don't need to continue suffering. We can actually bring an end to suffering for ourselves and for others. And that brings us to the fourth noble truth, which is the path. The path can be taught as the three vehicles, or it can be taught very simply with the words, do no harm, practice virtue, and tame your mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So here at our Dharma Center and there at your Dharma Center, we all begin with these Four Noble Truths, and we all begin with quiet sitting practice. And by understanding the cause of suffering as being clinging and fixation, and the practice of shamatha for many of us is our very first introduction to learning how to let go of something. Because remember, the third noble truth is that because suffering has a cause that is clinging and fixation, it has an automatic solution, which is learning how to let go of the fixations that we have. But of course, you can't just say to someone who's suffering, oh, just let that go. You can't do that. You have to teach people how to let go. And in shamatha practice, for many of us, it's our very first experiment on ourselves in learning how to let go of something. You've all done it. You're sitting there and you're doing your best to do your shamatha practice. You're observing the breath coming and going, observing the breath coming and going, and then suddenly a thought comes to you and you're distracted from the breath. And suddenly you're reborn in the world of that thought, thinking something wonderful has happened or thinking something terrible has happened, and being drawn into the story of that thought. But the moment we recognize that we're thinking, we are taught as meditators, the moment we realize that we are distracted by a thought, we can put our attention to this and say, I am no longer meditating. I'm actually in the world of this thought. I am thinking. And by recognizing thinking, we could even label it thinking. We let it go. And the technique teaches us, label it, let it go, and return to the breath for a fresh start. And by doing this process over and over again, we keep coming back to the breath. We keep coming back to the mind as it is, watching and being present in the present moment with the breath as our guide. And so what happens to those thoughts when we notice them, label them, and let them go? In most cases, they will disappear, which makes us feel a little bit of relief because we had a moment where we were drawn into the world of that thought, but by letting the thought go, we gained a power. And the power that we gained was over our own attention. We gained the power over our own mind. We gained the power over our own attention. And what we place our attention on is where we are at any given moment. So learning this one simple skill, placing the attention on the breath, in and out, and then when we notice that we're drawn away from that, labeling it, thinking, letting it go, and returning our attention to the technique for a fresh start. And that fresh start over and over and over again allows us to practice gentleness for ourselves, noticing that we were drawn away, noticing that we can let it go and return. We get the power. We feel empowered by the process of meditation. And what's really interesting about this is that this very simple technique of learning to notice and learning to let go and return our attention, it gives us the power to begin to make changes when we're not meditating. Maybe you've experienced this, maybe not, but it's happened to me a couple of times when I'm in a discussion, perhaps we'll say a heated discussion with someone about something, and I'm a little bit angry. At some point during that discussion, it might occur to me, oh, by the way, you're angry. Instead of believing the story that I am right, the other person is wrong, I suddenly notice how I am feeling and what my brain is, what my mind is doing, and what my attention is doing. And I can actually take one step back from that story, one step back from that thought, and label it thinking, and return my attention to the breath in the middle of that argument. And it destabilizes some folks because they're not used to the person they're arguing with suddenly stepping back and saying, wait a minute, do I really want to be doing this? I've told the story several times of a friend of mine who's a psychotherapist, and he was trying to learn how to let go of thinking when he wasn't meditating. And he was in the middle of an argument with his wife, and he took that one step back and stopped arguing. And she's like, what's the matter? Aren't you going to keep going? And he said, you'll have to excuse me. I'm trying to learn a new behavior. You'll have to excuse me. I'm trying to learn a new behavior, because he recognized that he had the power to step back and everything was going to be all right. He was going to be all right. The argument was going to be all right. Everything was going to be all right. And that gave him the understanding that being able to let go is something that we can gradually learn, both from the practice of meditation and from the effects of meditation on our everyday thinking and our everyday life. So for many people, this is where they recognize that Buddhism has something to offer them. The moment they can let go of a thought in their everyday life. when they're out and walking around. And that makes them curious. They want to know more. They want to know if there's more to Buddhism than just letting go of a thought, if there's more that they can study and they can understand. And this is where centers like ours are very important, because we can offer people instructions and we can offer people methods of not just returning the attention again and again to the breath in our shamatha meditation, but we can also train people how to take on specific thoughts, not just to let go of all thoughts, but to take on specific thoughts, such as thoughts of love and compassion. And this is how the bodhisattva heart gets born in many of us. Many people love the teachings about the bodhisattva who lives to benefit others. And we can learn how to hold the mind of the bodhisattva one thought at a time by training ourselves to have a different response when we feel upset, and training ourselves to have a different response when we are feeling sad, and have to have a different response when we're angry, and so on. Through the practices of compassion meditation, not just quiet sitting meditation, but compassion meditation, we can come to learn a new habit, a new way of looking at the mind, a new way of seeing our potential. And that is the second practice that we teach at the Dharma Center. The first practice is shamatha. The second practice is the compassion meditation. And for many people, the third practice is the practice of mantra and visualization that come from the Vajrayana tradition. And each of these three basic practices that we do at the Karma Thegsum Chöling Center help people to learn how to live differently, learn how to work with their minds differently. Shamatha helps them get some, what do they say in the commercials? Temporary relief from, the shamatha practice gives us temporary relief from greater samsara, the world of suffering that the Buddha talked about as being caused by clinging and fixation. We can get some temporary relief from the minor pains of samsara. And in the practice of compassion meditation, we can learn how to take on habits of thinking in which we think of benefiting not just ourselves, but other beings. And taking on those habits, then we begin to change who we are, from a person who is only self-interested to a person who is interested in others. And then finally, in mantra meditation, we learn about Buddha nature. We learn that we have the capacity to awaken our own mind to be a Buddha. And we do this through the practice of visualizing ourselves as a Buddha or Bodhisattva, to take on the form of a Buddha or Bodhisattva, reciting the mantra, such as Chenrezi's compassion mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, taking on the practice of mantra as a way of practicing the speech of an enlightened being, and then learning how to rest the mind in itself, which is the mind of a bodhisattva or an enlightened being. So by taking on the practice of the body, speech, and mind of an enlightened being, we slowly and gradually nurture the qualities of awakening within ourselves and awaken our own Buddha nature. So these three practices, shamatha, compassion meditation, and mantra, form the practice curriculum of the Karma Thegsum Cholings. These practices were given to us by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, the founder of our centers, as a way of helping people who come into us from their daily lives, seeking relief from their mental afflictions, the development of their love and compassion, and an understanding of what awakening could mean for them. So I wanted to talk about that first. And I'm sorry that was a lot, but I was afraid that if I stopped in the middle, I might forget where I was going. And and I wanted to make sure I presented the three practices as a way of introducing the idea that Dharma centers represent lineage. So this was the way a center represents the general lineage of the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. But in the next section of my talk, I'll talk a little bit about the Karma Kagyu tradition and the Mahamudra practice. But first, I just had to start with some generalities. So what do you have in the way of thoughts, questions, and curiosities? Is there, I see there's something in chat. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, this is Betty. Hello. Let's see. How are you? Join the Dharma teaching. Oh, very great. Well, that's very sweet. Thank you very much for saying hello. I really appreciate seeing you. Thank you, Betty. Does anyone have questions or things they're curious about? You can, I think it's okay to unmute, right, Max? Can they do that?
Yes.
Daniel.
Hello, everyone. I have a question about Nundro practice. It's called the 4 uncommon preliminaries. And I think sometimes it seems like it's not very emphasized, and sometimes it is emphasized. And I'm curious what you would say about the importance of Nundro for us Karma Kagyu students.
That's in the next part of my talk. How exciting. You anticipated the next part of my talk. That will be the next part. And I will get into that in a minute. But I see, you're right with me. I tell you what. So that'll be the very next thing I talk about.
Sure.
So thank you. I won't answer that question just this minute. I hope you'll be patient. But that will be the very next thing we talk about.
All right.
But thank you for asking. Other questions that people might have? Okay, I had to check first. Thank you for that. Okay, well, then, in answer to Daniel's question, now that we've talked about the basic practices of our Dharma centers, shamatha, tonglen, and lojong. Tonglen means sending and receiving. It's the compassion practice that we do. And it's part of a larger topic called mind training, training the mind in love and compassion. So shamatha is the basic practice. The mind training and compassion practice is the Mahayana practice. And then the Vajrayana practice for many of us begins with Chenrezi. As I mentioned earlier, learning to relate to our Buddha nature is, it's a wonderful practice. And mantra and visualization practice gives many of us our first inkling that there is something within us that's very special and that we can work with. But when we're doing shamatha and then also our practice of compassion meditation, sometimes we get a deeper instinct that there's more to us than just thought, that there might actually be some wisdom within us and some understanding of the nature of mind, how mind is. And that brings us to the second part of Vajrayana practice. Vajrayana practice, according to Trungpa Rinpoche, is divided into 2 paths: the path of liberation and the path of skillful means. These 2 paths of the Vajrayana are represented at our center by the path of skillful means is represented by mantra practices, the various mantra practices that we do, such as Chenrezig, Tara, Medicine Buddha, and so on. But the path of liberation practices that are represented at our center begin and end with the practice of Mahamudra. Now let's see if I can do what I'd like to do here. And let's see if I can do a screen share and show you my whiteboard. That's a joke. It's not really a whiteboard. It's a Microsoft Word document that I'm going to type in. So here's the name of the, remember I said that there were several different teaching lineages of the Buddha that grew up over time. Well, one of the teaching lineages is called the Mahamudra tradition. Mahamudra. Maha means great. And mudra has several meanings, but here it means seal, like the seal of authenticity on a document. And so what Khenpo Rinpoche used as the example, he said in the old days when there were kings and queens, the king or the queen would issue their edicts in a special letter that was sealed. And that seal let you know that it was coming directly from the king or from the queen, and that it was the king or queen's words, and they should be heard. And so just like that, the seal of the king or queen guaranteed to the reader the authenticity of the document. Well, in Mahamudra practice, the practitioner discovers the nature of their own mind for themselves and by themselves, and therefore finds out the authentic nature of their minds. And they do this through the two practices. There are two parts to the Mahamudra practice. It has the first part, which is called the preliminary, and then the main practice. So Mahamudra has two parts. The preliminaries for Mahamudra and the main practice. If we look at the Mahamudra tradition, it begins in history with the Buddha Shakyamuni, who taught that the basic nature of mind was, he taught about the basic nature of mind as being emptiness and luminosity. The basic nature of mind, according to the teachings of the Buddha, is emptiness, which means it's not established. In other words, our mind is not a material thing. And yet, mind is not nothing. It's everything. It has an experiential quality. A knowing quality. And it can know itself. So the Buddha Shakyamuni gave the original teachings on the nature of mind. And so that's how Mahamudra got started in the time of the historical Buddha. He started it all by giving the teachings on mind. And then these teachings were handed down from master to disciple in an unbroken line. Many great masters learned about and practiced these teachings. But the one we're going to, there are what is called the long lineage of Mahamudra. It begins with the Buddha Shakyamuni. But the short lineage of Mahamudra begins with Tilopa. Tilopa lived in the 900s and was a great practitioner who, well, I can give you a little bit of details about him in a few minutes, and I'll probably talk more about him next week. Let's see, what time am I doing? Okay, yeah. I think what I'm going to just say tonight is that we'll start with the idea that the long lineage of Mahamudra begins with the Buddha Shakyamuni, and the short lineage of Mahamudra begins with Tilopa, who received the long lineage, but had but upon his own enlightenment, experienced a vision of the Buddha Shakyamuni in the form of a blue Buddha, who came to be known as Vajradhara, or Vajra holder. And in that vision, the Buddha Vajradhara gave Tilopa a special instruction, an essential instruction, an instruction that's like the essence of a medicine that's distilled from a plant. And that this essential medicine, so to speak, this essential teaching became the short lineage of Mahamudra that we read about in the prayer that we started our evening with tonight. And so this is a little bit about what Mahamudra is, what its history is, and how the lineages came to be. What we're going to talk about next week is, Daniel, we will not get to your 2 parts of Mahamudra tonight. It looks like we're going to start with that next time. But we'll talk about it then. Mahamudra has 2 parts, and if you practice them both, one will lay the foundation for the other. And so it's my hope that by talking about this, you'll see the specialness of the Mahamudra practice, and the fact that we receive these teachings and we can practice these teachings even now is a very special thing indeed. So I think that this is as much as I want to present about Mahamudra tonight, but next week we're going to talk a little bit about the history. We're going to talk about Tilopa and the special teachers of the Mahamudra lineage. And then we'll talk a little bit about the teachings and practices in the 3rd installment of our class. I might be able to get to the practices in the 2nd class. Daniel, I'll get there. If I don't make it till the 3rd class, it will be covered. You can count on that. So I want to make sure there's time for questions in case people have questions. We've got several minutes for questions of any kind. I know Daniel's original question is Mahamudra emphasized at the Dharma centers? And the answer is yes, it definitely is. And in fact, the Mahamudra preliminaries called Nundro, because that's the literal meaning of the word Nundro, the preliminary. Nundro means preliminary. Those particular practices of the preliminary are emphasized at all the Dharma centers I have visited, and of the KTC centers that I have visited. So I feel it's very, very important. And I'll talk a little bit more next time as to why they're so special, and why the 16th Karmapa said that the preliminaries of Mahamudra were in many ways more profound than the main practice of Mahamudra. anyway, I could go on about that, but then I wouldn't give you time for your questions. So let's see what questions are out there. You can type your questions into chat, or you can use the raise hand function in the reactions section of your Zoom window. Questions, curiosities?
I typed in a question. I'm
Oh,
not a
I'm
que-
sorry,
well,
I
kind
didn't
of
see it.
well, sort of yeah. It's
My
just
bad. Thank
that's
you.
okay.
There we go. So the question, yeah, I see it now. I'm sorry, I didn't see it before. Thank you. So the Mahamudra lineage prayer tells the story of the lineage of the Kagyu. In fact, it tells a little of the history in those first few lines. And then the stanzas that follow are actually a teaching on the two parts of Nundro, the preliminaries and the main practice. So yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing with you a little bit about that. Did you have a second question about that?
Well,
or-
because it goes into the Talopa, Naropa, Marpa, Milarepa, Lord of Dharma, Gampopa. Like it tells the whole lineage story.
That's it really is. In fact, you know what I think? I think that these prayers are little capsule teachings on their own, you know. Let's see if I can bring this up. When we meet next time, we'll start here on the kagyuoffice.org website, where we talk about some of those teachers. This is a picture of Gampopa, who is one of the teachers named in the Karma Kagyu lineage prayer. He's the one who united the two streams of practice on mind training and the practice of Mahamudra into one lineage. And so he's a very special teacher. And we'll start with this next time. If there are no questions, we'll start with it tonight and talk a little bit about the Yogin Talopa and Naropa, Marpa, and so on, and how they advanced the teachings of Mahamudra from the past into the present. Pretty cool, right? Other questions that people might have?
There's another question in chat.
Oh, very good. Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to put the chat window here. I am open to all that you have said, but it seems too soon to ask questions. Oh, I'll tell you what, if you have questions about anything that you are curious about in terms of Buddhism, you can type them into the chat. I do understand it's not too soon from my point of view, but I understand that maybe from what you've heard this evening, you don't have questions, and that, you know, that's fine. But if you have questions, feel free to put them in. My teacher had a belief, and it was that there was no such thing as a silly question. So I kind of use that as my watchword too. Let's see, here's one. Okay. Oh, that's okay. That's just a message saying thank you. It's like, thank you. I appreciate it. Someone's writing a thank you to me, and it's like, thank you so much. Okay, I see Max. Max, you have your hand up.
I'm probably the one with a silly question.
Oh,
So,
go for it. I'm here for you.
so this is something I have to think about sometimes when I meet somebody who is not a Buddhist and they ask me, what is a Buddhist? Then, you know, I try to make it as clear and simple as possible. But also sometimes when you meet somebody who is a Buddhist of another tradition or lineage, so my question to this is, in both situations, I always feel inadequate in having enough knowledge to explain things properly and not getting it wrong, because I feel like, you know, we are part of a really rich tradition.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I just wondered what you have to say on the subject, on an easy introduction when somebody asks about it without
Yeah.
getting it wrong, basically.
Well, I think that's a common concern that everyone has.
Mhm.
And I think it's coming from a sincere place, because Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, the Dharma, has meant a lot to us and has made a very big difference in our own lives. And so because it's meant a lot to us and has made a big difference in our own lives, we feel a certain reverence and respect for it. And maybe just a little bit of a feeling that we're not adequate,
Mhm.
that we could never possibly help another person with Dharma. But the fact of the matter is, Khenpo Rinpoche said on more than one occasion, if you know one more fact than the person standing next to you, you actually, and they ask you a question and you know the answer, it's really important that you share what you know. Of course, we can't share what we don't know, but if they ask you who was the Buddha, well, you don't have to worry about getting it wrong, because it's really well known that he lived 2,500 years ago in India. He attained a state of spiritual awakening, and then he taught the methods for how to do that for ourselves. And we're still using them and they're still working. I think that's pretty simple. You might, does that help at all?
Oh, definitely. But it
Yeah.
always sounds so much better when you say it. I feel like I'm waffling and making something sound much more complex than it really is. And I tangle myself up in words. So yes.
Mhm. Well, I think we all come to Dharma with what I like to call our own personal style of confusion.
Mhm.
Through our karmic accumulation and habitual tendencies, we might tend to have an impulse or an impulsive feeling. And then we might believe that impulsive feeling, like I'm not good enough, or I couldn't possibly know, or it's just too complex for me to explain. But really, if we allow our mind to settle a bit and just stay with the basics, he lived, he gained enlightenment, he taught, he passed away. And now we have the three basic teachings: do no harm, practice virtue, tame your mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. That was the 4 statements he made. You don't even have to explain the 4 noble truths. You don't have to worry about trying to get that right or wrong or whatever. It's like the simplicity of doing no harm. Everybody can get that. The simplicity of benefiting and taking care of others, of oneself and others. That's pretty simple. And then taming your mind so that you know how to benefit, and how to benefit and how to not harm. And that you can then say, all of us are stumbling toward the light. That's, does that help a bit?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, because I
Gonna write
think,
this down.
yeah.
As well.
I mean, it's pretty, you know what I'm saying? It's like,
Oh,
if we can just somehow, if we can just step back from the spin, because we might be spinning around, not knowing what to say and thinking that it's complicated. But if we just step back from the spinning for just a second and say, what's true? Buddha got enlightened.
Mhm.
That's true. Enlightenment is a possible state for human beings, and we're trying to do it. Right. And then we try to do those 3 things, and try to respect the fact that Buddha got enlightened. Enlightenment is possible. We want to do it too. And we try our best to not harm, to benefit, and to tame our minds. So I think we can try that and see how that goes, And they say, well, what's the difference between all the different kinds of Buddhism? You say, well, they're all doing those 3 things: doing no harm, practicing virtue, and taming the mind. There are just many lineages that arose from the Buddha's many teachings, because he taught for 45 years, That's a lot. And if people say to you, where's the Buddhist Bible? You can say, well, it would cover several volumes on that wall, several shelves on that wall, right? But if you want to read a short and concise version of it, read the Dhammapada, which are the basic sayings of the Buddha. If they want just a capsule, that way you don't have to try to explain it. We can let the Buddha talk, you know.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
That way we don't have to get it right or wrong, you know. It doesn't depend on us, you know. But thank you for asking that question. I'm really glad you asked, because I think we all go through that, because we love Dharma. And we're very sincere, right? It's coming from a good place.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Yes, I see Annie. Yes.
I think I've asked this question before, and my muddled mind is still muddled. And I'm going to see if a very, very simple way of saying it would have any accuracy. Mahamudra is a series of practices in the Kagyu school. Dzogchen is a series of practices in the Nyingma school.
Yep.
Yoo-hoo!
Yes, that's so great. And I've got one more for you.
Yes.
Okay, I've got one more for you. Okay. There's by the way, if you like the instructive nature, I'm so glad that that you pointed out, Jody, that you pointed out like that the prayer has like little, it has different parts. It's got like the history in it, and it's got like the teaching about what Mahamudra is in it. So it's actually pretty cool, right? Well, there's another prayer that also is instructive, and it's the aspiration of Mahamudra of definitive meaning by the third Karmapa. And I think we've already studied that here, but it's got a lot of teaching inside it too. And so, okay, here's one more for you, Ani. It's, I don't have the book in front of me. I'm going to say it's somewhere in the late teens or 20s of the 26 verses of the aspiration for Mahamudra. It says, free from fabrication, it is Mahamudra. Let's see, free from extremes, it is the great middle way. As it includes everything, it's the great perfection. May we understand that knowing one accomplishes all. And that's essentially what the four lines of that verse are. And the great middle way, also known as Madhyamaka, and I'm going to butcher the spelling of it. I have no idea. Madhyamaka. That's probably not it. Madhyamaka. Anyhow, it means the great middle way. And then Dzogchen is the great middle way is studied by the Gelug and the Sakya traditions, but it's also studied by other traditions as well. And so those are the three main ways of understanding the nature of mind and reality. You know, the three main ways of understanding the nature of mind and reality are Mahamudra, Madhyamaka, and Dzogchen. Dzogchen means the great perfection. Okay, right. And then Mahamudra, of course, is the great seal, you know, the great authenticity. Yeah, cool. So I thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. For some reason, I muddle myself on this. I have no idea why, but I do.
You know, I tell you what, I can so relate to what you're saying, Ani, and also Max, I can completely relate to what you have to say too, because I have to tell you, it took me like years before I could answer the question. And I mean, a long time before I could answer the question, like, what do Buddhists believe? And it's like, there's a lot to it. So I've been there, buddy. I have been there.
Thank you. Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome. You're welcome. Oh, I've got time for one more. Is there one more out there? Well, then that means we get to sit for a minute. And let's see. Do I have a chime? Let's see if I can get a meditation chime. Yeah, I don't always come equipped to these meetings. I do have a meditation chime. We can sit for a minute. That's always good. Okay, so bringing our attention to the breath and allowing our attention to rest on the breath as it comes in and goes out. We're just going to sit quietly for a minute or two. All right. That was a little bit. I have to get this. I wonder if I can tune this chime. What do you think? Thank you so much, all of you, for being here this evening. And thanks to the members and friends of the Karma Thegsum Chöling Center of Santa Monica. You guys are the best. And I am so glad that you're doing this series of teachings, because between the teachings that you're getting from Lama Adam on basic Buddhist practice and basic Buddhist viewpoints about life and everything, between those teachings and then the teachings on the history and the lineage here we're doing, it's all pretty amazing. So I'm really happy that we're able to show these things, and that you've got Lama Karma coming too, right? So I'm really thrilled for you, and I'm so glad.
Thank you, Lama K, and thank you for staying up late for us.
Yes,
Really
thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Yeah, let's dedicate our merit tonight. We dedicate this merit to all sentient beings, making the aspiration that all beings are free from suffering, come to Buddhahood, and then emanate in all directions to benefit sentient beings. I'll recite a short prayer. Through this merit, may all achieve the omniscience of Buddhahood. May it defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may we free all beings. May we free all beings. May we free all beings. Thank you.
Thank you, Lama Kathy, Wesley.